Hey, it's me again, Matthew McKenzie, mental health care activist or care activist, because I do raise awareness of carers in general at times. It's not always on those who are caring for someone with mental ill health. I do raise awareness of those who care for someone with cancer, and there will be times I will cover, in fact, I already have quite a number of times, but on upcoming lectures, I will cover on really deep fundamental questions and queries on unpaid carers as a whole. Because I think one, it's important, and two, I have the platform to do it. So I have a blog. If you're interested in reading some of my blog posts, I'll try and remember to put the link in my in the description of this video. I also have social media, like, well, I call it Twitter anyway, and stuff on Facebook. But anyway, let's not dither dally and whatever. We're going to be talking about tackling trauma. The video I did previously was quite a dark video, quite a dark lecture. It really was. So I thought it's quite urgent in a sense to, give carers, those who are caring for mental ill health, and it doesn't have to be strictly mental illness, it can be other things as well. Without a doubt, carers do get affected by trauma. No doubt about that. And there are other things that get affected by, and that's other lectures to come. But how, now that well, if you haven't looked at that video, please do, about how trauma can affect carers and the examples of what brings it on. But let's say, you're on this video now, you want to tackle it, you want to fight it, you want to recognize and get out of that situation that's really affecting you deeply. So how do we do this? So I'm going to talk about what is trauma. This is a quick reminder, just in case, you don't really know. And then we'll look at acknowledging your own traumas and triggers. I think that's very difficult, to be honest. And I was looking around to compile this lecture. I was thinking maybe I shouldn't even include this one, but to be honest, I think it's one of the first steps in tackling trauma, to be honest. Developing grounding techniques for emotional regulation. I'll be talking about that. Setting clear and compassionate boundaries. The key word is compassionate, being kind to yourself. I'll try not to race ahead and talk about the stuff before I even show the thing. Then we'll be engaging in, looking for professional support for your healing. In fact, I know there's, I won't say the name, but there's a carer that is actually working on being a healer. And I think that's, a great thing to do, because without a doubt, I know there's so many people out there, and this is including carers, that actually need healing. But you can actually get professional support for your own healing. Practice compassion, the keywords there again, compassionate self-care, and that's another keyword. How does one go about doing that? So stay tuned. Developing skills for emotional detachment when needed, of course. Creating a safety plan for high stress situations. Now, that's obviously if you're, so it's in the care role, not fully, you can be outside of that caring role and still obviously going through trauma and something's triggered it off. It's always wise to have that safety plan. Focusing on building resilience and strength. I mentioned resilience a lot in my other videos. If you scroll down through them of my channel, and I've mentioned resilience a lot in my poetry book. So it's a very important word for unpaid carers. Reflecting and reassessing regularly. It's not just a one-time thing. Tackling trauma, you've got to see what works and what doesn't, and reassess it. And before we reach our conclusion, accept that healing is ongoing. And that's linked to what I've said before. It's not a one-shot process. It could take a long time, depending on the stage of your trauma journey, really. And then we'll wrap that up. So I don't want to make this lecture long. I might speed through some things or be brief on others, but I will certainly revisit topics that might need a bit more exploration. So, quickly, what is trauma? So, trauma is an emotional response to a stressful or really dangerous event that we're not really prepared for. We're just sort of thrown into it, and we use all the tools we know. They might not be any good, but in that stressful situation, it can cause either lasting or both lasting or psychological harm. And I would say to those kind of some of mental ill health, it's more psychological, although there are situations, unfortunately, it can be physical. We're not trained in that role. But you can only do what you can. Um, the situation with trauma is it can affect a person's sense of safety, sense of self, and ability to regulate emotion. So you might not even be aware that you're going through trauma, but something is affecting, your day-to-day abilities to carry out any tasks. It's just something you feel you're not really happy with. It's changing your mood. It's slowing you down. That's a form of trauma, basically. Let's continue onwards. So the very first step before anything else that I'm, going to mention out of this lecture is that you really need to acknowledge that your own trauma and what those triggers are. And in fact, I probably will revisit this later on because I still think it needs a lot of explorations. We don't really often know the triggers, or we know that after some time we're going through traumatic events until someone might even actually point that out to us, asking if we're okay. How do you actually identify? Well, it's being aware of situations. Remember, it's triggers. So identify personal triggers, being aware of situations, words, or behaviors that might trigger your trauma responses, even smells, it might trigger it off. And, be really brief on this. Obviously, you've had experienced really difficult situations when you're caring for someone with mental ill health. Something's happened, you've observed something, it's traumatic. Um, you're out of that situation, but it still keeps bothering you. And you're wondering, well, why? Why is this happening? Well, something's triggered it off. So when you know what might set it off, like obviously difficult feelings, you can prepare or mitigate them. And I don't think this is an easy thing to do. There is something that's coming up that I will point out that might help. In fact, I think will help in regards to identifying personal triggers, but it does take a bit of effort. So, watch this space. I will mention it. I'll try to, hopefully. Next thing is self-validation. You have to remind yourself that your experiences are valid and they are significant. This can be a challenge when a professional says it's not that significant and that you can cope. It's what you feel of yourself is really important. So sometimes, and this can also be another problem, caregivers downplay their own trauma. I actually run two peer groups, and I always say to carers, you know, how are you coping? And before I say anything else, they start talking about their loved ones. Yeah, I can understand that. Not a problem. Talk about your loved one. That's okay. I'm asking how are you? How are things getting along? And they don't have to tell me in some sense, but what I'm trying to tease out is, are they coping well? Is there something that's that needs to be protected or developed to fight against? Now, this is a big problem amongst unpaid caregivers. That part of that role, unfortunately, is sacrifice. But it's not really a good sacrifice if you're literally sacrificing your own well-being to do your role. And as I've put down here, especially if they focus on helping others, obviously others being the person that they're caring for. So it's got to be that form of self-validation. If that's not there, then, if you don't validate that you're going through a really tough time emotionally, then the longer or it well, the longer it'll go on and more, and what's worse, it can develop to unmanageable situations. That I'm talking about trauma. So the first bit really is acknowledging and trying to work out what those triggers are. I don't think it's easy. It takes time to do this one, but it's critical before you do anything else. So our next one is developing grounding techniques for emotional regulation. So what do I mean by this? Is It's mindfulness. This is a form of grounding, mindfulness and breathing exercises. Not easy to begin with. And sometimes people think it sounds cheesy or corny, breathing and all this. But yeah, actually, at times it does work. You got to start with something. So it's techniques like deep breathing, grounding exercises, being in the present. Yeah, that's grounding. And mindfulness can help you stay present during stressful moments. Notice with trauma, it might sort of draw you back to that traumatic experience. You pause and your mind wanders. And before you know it, you're feeling tense, angry, stressed, depressed, um, scared, anxious, and I'm sure there's worse things that can happen. But the key word is grounding yourself and being present, taking deep breaths. And there are other excellent things I'm going to present here. So I think this is quite important. Quite important. The best things about that is it doesn't cost a thing. Deep breathing, good things, meditation. Not easy to start off with, but just 5 minutes a day to try and ground yourself and train that mind to bring it back into the presence. Clear out any noises. Although the focus of meditation really is to notice what's around you. Something I will definitely present on because I'm a bit of a fan of meditation. I don't always do it, but I know its powers. Physical grounding is like actions such as gripping a comfortable, I should have taken that picture of a guy holding a stress ball. I do have that picture. But it's actually gripping a comforting object, feeling the floor under your feet. Basically, again, it's a bit of a mixture of that mindfulness again, that meditation, staying in the present. That's the key word. Feeling the floor under your feet, even stretching, it helps you stay connected. And the key word is present. I should have put that in bold. If you're triggered, the problem is though, is realizing that you're triggered. Something's triggered you. So how do you catch yourself in time? Well, the answer is to do these things before those triggers. So you've got to practice these things. I'm not saying you're not going to be aware of yourself being triggered. The point of emotional regulation is practice, practice, practice. And then when that triggering comes again, you'll recognize it because you're practicing being in the present. So it's not a one shot thing. It's got to be something that's an ongoing thing, and it will make its difference, but it does take time. Let's continue. Setting yourself clear and compassionate. And remember the keyword compassionate boundaries. So actually define what you can and cannot do. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you care less. It just ensures you have the capacity to keep caring. Decide in advance, what kinds of support you're able to offer. This is quite important because this is trying to set a situation where you don't want to be overwhelmed, which can easily happen. Basically it could mean limiting the time spent in intense situations, limiting how much support you give. You've got to keep an eye out for your own health and well-being. Although it's not easy to do, you're watching your loved one really struggled. So, where do you cross the line? Where do you draw the line? So, but you've got to set those boundaries because at the end of the day, you're only really one person, unless another family member is chipping in. And that can also help if they start chipping in and helping to provide unpaid care. That gives you a bit of respite. But, this is a situation where you're going through trauma now and you got to now start looking after yourself. I think the best phrase is if you can't care for yourself, how on earth are you going to care for someone else? And I think that phrase sticks. So this one I think is actually quite difficult when I was thinking of this one. Communicating your needs. It's the problem with this is that you need to be pretty good at communicating, or you got to learn it, but you got to start somewhere. So it's when it's appropriate, communicate your limits to the person you're caring for, especially if they impact your availability or responsibility. This is all fine and well if you're caring for someone that is aware of their ill health, if you know what I mean. not so easy if someone is in the throes of mental illness. Obviously, you're going to struggle doing it. So the point is really to do this when someone perhaps has sort of recovered, and even then, that might be tricky because it depends on the relationship you have with them, whether it's deteriorated. But at the end of the day, you're trying to you're trying to let them know that you do need a break, and that you have to work on your own healing. So there's got to be a sort of a way to develop that mutual understanding and respect. So this is definitely one of the tools that's needed to limit trauma. I'm not saying it's going to remove it. I'm just saying it's a way to combat it before it gets worse. The only tricky thing is that communicating your needs isn't actually and a whole other lecture. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was an hour long, but I do have something like that planned. So this is where you're going to be reaching out for others. And I think it's a great idea too. I think the issue though is whether it's going to be available, but it's something you need to take note of. So, a therapist can help you process your trauma and develop personalized coping strategy. Individual therapy. So it's basically finding a therapist, and I do know of some carers that actually have one. I think the point to this is how much are you going to put in to your own health and well-being, you know, and we should never put a price on health. But I think it's important that if that's something you're going to need to help you, then do take it. And there actually is free forms of treatment on the NHS. One thing I can think of is increasing access to psychological therapy. It's not going to be brilliant for everyone, but it is a start. And as far as the NHS is recognizing the need and the importance for mental well-being, especially for carers, um, I hope something that can be fully developed for all. I think this one, though, is more tricky. Trauma-informed support groups. Sometimes connecting with others who are also managing trauma while caregiving can be validating and comforting. Yes, makes sense. Well, trying to find those groups is another issue. If you do come across them, though, and I do think Eventbrite is a good place to start, um, or referrals, or if you're lucky, your care center might actually have one. So it's something to consider. And just to take note, I'm not a mental health professional. This is only stuff I've come across, stuff that I've tried before, or that I've encountered in the groups that I've run. But if you do come across, a professional that is running these things, it's worth engaging in professional support for your own healing. So we're not doing too bad. We've got a few tools in the caregiving bag to tackle trauma. But there are others. Practice compassionate self-care daily, and you can see a picture. And now this has reminded me to say this is going to be a brilliant way to tackle triggers. Remember, I mentioned this at the start of the lecture. How on earth can you recognize triggers? Well, here we go. Prioritize daily resets. Make self-care a non-negotiable part of your routine, especially on tough days. Self-care doesn't have to be elaborate. It could be just small acts like going for a walk, journaling. Now that's the key word here, journaling. And I'll talk about this a bit more. Or listening to calming music can help maintain emotional balance. So these are tools, again, that you can use to limit and also tackle to a point forms of trauma. But the big one here is mindful journaling. Writing down your thoughts can help you separate your own experience from the persons that you're supporting, like, using prompts like today I felt, or, I feel supported when. So to explore what you need for your own healing. So the key word here is journaling and a few other things really, but I want to look into the journaling bit first. I always say to carers that the groups that I run is to journal. The reason why is you start writing how you feel, and you eventually will write that something's difficult, something difficult's happening. You might feel painful to write it down after 2 weeks. If you journal every day, even if it's just 5 minutes, Um, you begin to go back and read your journal, and what you're going to find in your journal is triggers. You'll be writing down triggers of what made you feel the way you did. And from there, you start identifying what they are before they hit you. You start writing in your journal, I've practiced this today because I noticed what I write was so depressing. I didn't like it. But if you don't write it down, you're sort of floating. You're in automatic mode and you don't know what's coming at you. I think the keyword here is to know yourself is to heal yourself in some sense. You've got to know yourself in a sense that what are your things you want to work on, and journaling is the best way to do it because one, it's free to do. It does take time, but it does offer a lot in daily self-care, and it backs itself up as journaling to keep an eye on your loved one, dates, about appointments and things to consider, or if you're making a complaint. I've mentioned this a few times. It's definitely the one thing to go to, but not always easy to do. I understand people just want to sit down and have their tea and leave the journal in for another day. That I do understand. The other thing, though, the prompts is quite important, especially when it's positive prompts. I feel supported when, or this really helps me today, or this is a common effect. Use the positive thoughts and the quotes in your journal as well, because that way you know what helps you. So developing skills for emotional detachment when needed. Mostly practice healthy detachment. Emotional detachment doesn't mean indifference. It's about caring without absorbing other person's emotions. Um, I suppose when you feel like you get yourself drawn in into the person's emotions, the point is practicing or visualizing a protective boundary around yourself, or to remind yourself that that person's experiences are separate from yours. So you don't want to be just sucked in to the chaos or the ill health that is in front of you. Hence, you don't. It's a tricky one. This one. It's sometimes in our human psyche we tend to get drawn in. We tend to feel the flames of the chaos or the fire that's we're trying to control. And when someone starts an argument, we argue. Obviously, it's just trying to find a way of detaching from that situation. Using reflective techniques is, after difficult interactions, take a few minutes to reflect on what your feelings are and what belong to the other person. Those feelings, what their feelings is not yours. It's theirs. It's what they're going through. Acknowledging this difference can create an emotional clarity, and prevent overwhelming emotions from accumulating. Yeah, not an easy one, but it's important to say, look, whatever's in front of you, whatever mental ill health is there, that's what you're trying to work on reducing and providing support and help. It's not whatever they say, that's their illness talking. You can't control them, but what you can do is control your own emotions. And that's what I'm basically trying to get at here. Emotional detachment and what you can control when needed, of course. And it's not something you're not saying you're not going to care, you know, give a damn or whatever. You are going to try your best. But at the same time, you've got to use boundaries, techniques, reflective techniques to say, this is my emotions and I'm going to be in control of myself and regulate them. I think this one's really important. I often say in my lectures, plan ahead, and this is the same situation, a safety plan for high stress situations. So what do I mean by this? So basically, it's identifying safe spaces and people that can, you're going to create a list of safe spaces or people to reach out to when you're feeling overwhelmed. Knowing, where you can go or who you can talk to during difficult moments can actually, make you feel more secure. And I think it's as simple as it is. It's limited, related to like just going for a walk. That's a safe place. Walking in the park, it's nice and quiet. Might use meditation where you listen to the birds, or walking near somewhere where nature is. Another place is like could be another carer who's gone through that similar situation. Just talking to them. Obviously, you don't want to overwhelm them. I don't think that's fair. But you might want like just 5, 10 minutes, at least that, to say, look, I need time out. I hope you don't mind me listening. The key word is don't overwhelm other carers with these things. Obviously, could be family members if they're willing to listen, but you don't want to use them for a 2 hour talk. I don't think that's something you've got to try and avoid. There are reasons why I've put other things here in this lecture, but it's important to identify safe spaces and people. Developing coping strategies in advance. So, creating that plan that secures specific steps for self-soothing or self-care in the aftermath of the high stress encounters. So that could be, as I mentioned, the practicing the deep breathing, calling a friend, even hobbies are a good way, as long as hobbies are positive and they can help you. As you can see, there's a lady on the computer. She could be reading, uh, something that can help her out, something that takes her mind off the stressful situation. Now, I've mentioned resilience a lot. So, what do I mean for battling trauma here? Resilience and strength. So, celebrating small wins and strengths in the way to recognize and celebrate your ability to manage both your own trauma and your caregiving responsibilities. Like celebrating even small successes can reinforce your strength and resilience, making it easier for you to handle the future. So it's not just as I said, a one shot sort of thing. It's basically even when you fail at tackling trauma, at least you're trying. Getting out of bed is a small win. Reflecting on the day and what things you failed on is a small win. Even listening to this or reading the blog on tackling trauma is a small win in a sense. A big win would be trying these things out, I would think. But it's about not just battling, it's about celebrating your ability to manage your own trauma, because there will be stumbles on that journey, and you've got to, it's not, as I said, it's not going to be a one shot, battle. It's going to be a long term thing. And this is obviously linked to setting realistic expectations. You're not going to be perfect. Acknowledging that caregiving isn't about the perfect emotional management. It's not. It's a journey of small steps, a long journey. It's okay to have tough days or moments when your own feels overwhelming. So it's basically saying as it is. It's just going to be setting things at your own pace, being compassionate towards yourself. It takes a while. Reflect and reassess regularly. So, periodic check-ins regularly reflect on your own emotional state, energy levels, and boundaries that you set. Assess whether certain caregiving activities or situations are triggering for you, and to be honest, some of them will be. But if that's the case, then what needs adjusting. And the reason for that is such self-awareness really is to reduce fatigue or burnout. Not easy to do, but you got to start somewhere. And if you feel that those situations are too triggering, are too difficult, leads to trauma, then you've got to modify your approach as needed. If certain aspects of that triggering of caring is too overwhelming, consider if it's possible to delegate them. And what I mentioned before about family members, if they're willing, it's not easy, or find ways of additional support. And lastly, accept that healing is ongoing. Acknowledge it takes time. Trauma didn't develop, slowly. um, and in a flash, I suppose. So I got that wrong. And the thing is, it's complex. I think trauma over time does take time to develop. So it's not going to be something that you're going to get rid of quickly. And I don't think it ever goes away. I just think it can be gradually reduced. Trauma is complex. It's sneaky. It can catch you when you least expect it. So while you may feel deeply committed to supporting someone else, and that's understandable, recognize that your own healing journey is equally valuable, despite what others say. And I did mention in my other video, as a caregiver, as a carer of some of mental ill health, people will say things. They'll say things stigmatizing. Professionals will judge you and think that, you're a tool to look after someone and may not have the time to point out that you are equally valuable just because you're not suffering as much, which is the case. I do agree. Doesn't mean that you don't need support yourself. It might not be as the higher levels as what the patient or the service user or the person that you're caring for is going through their own significant mental crisis. What we don't want is the carer themselves falling into a mental health crisis. That's the last thing we want. Carers are a partner uh, also in mental health, in the mental health team. They have their own skill sets that is very valuable, and we want to keep them in that triangle, in that connection. But the reason why I'm doing these lectures is no one's going to really easily tell you these things. So there's some things you're going to have to learn yourself. Um, that's the way it is, unfortunately. We have to arm ourselves, and I think carers who have been on that journey, on that road, should be sharing, what they have learned on that road with others in the hope that they don't have to struggle in their own situations. Let's wrap this up. So out of all of this stuff, it's not about perfection. It's focusing on that progress. Every step you take towards balancing your own trauma with that caregiving role is meaningful. That's the key word. It might not mean much to anyone else, and I don't expect it to. You're not going to change the stigma on cares and caregiving. I'm talking about cares, I'm talking about you. You are valid, you're important, you're worthy of being here. No one should be there to belittle you or say that your role isn't important or that you don't understand mental illness. You're not really there to try and understand it. You're just trying to cope with the best that you can because you just want to see your loved one see a better day. But you do have mental health. You might not know much, but remember, you don't have to be fully healed, and it's okay to, feel challenges, and sometimes that trauma will sneak up on you. But the thing is, focus on your progress, focus on your growth, focus on your resilience that you demonstrate every day. You don't have to be another victim. Anyway, if you like this video, do give it a like, share it with others, subscribe to this channel. I hope it's made a difference and made you think about if you're caring for someone, what you can do to care for yourself because God knows you need it. See you next time and take care of yourself.